The fire truck didn't even slow down. Sirens howling, lights flashing, it turned the corner like a raging bull and barreled straight toward Karen's brand-new luxury SUV, parked proudly across the bright red fire lane curb like it owned the street. Kids screamed. Wine glasses dropped. And just before the axe came swinging through the windshield, you could hear Karen's voice above all the chaos. "You touch my car and I'll sue every last one of you." 2 seconds later, glass exploded into the air like firework. And somehow, that was still not the wildest thing that happened that day. Earlier that morning, the neighborhood was unusually quiet, which should have been a red flag. I was in my backyard trimming hedges, listening to a podcast about bridge collapses. Yes, I'm that guy, when I saw Karen pacing her lawn with a clipboard, barking into a walkie-talkie like she was running a military op. That could only mean one thing: another one of her exclusive events. And by exclusive, I mean aggressively loud, wildly unpermitted, and likely to feature a bouncy castle taller than most homes. I sighed and looked over at the fire lane directly across from her driveway, freshly painted by the city just 2 weeks ago. No doubt in my mind, it was about to get blocked. Karen is the kind of person who introduces herself as Karen with an A, and thinks HOA rules are more like helpful suggestions for other people. She has this uncanny ability to ignore every posted sign while weaponizing the ones that benefit her. She once fined a neighbor for leaving their trash can out an extra day, during a snowstorm. So it came as no surprise when, around noon, a valet service pulled up and started directing cars right into the fire lane like it was VIP parking at a hotel. And of course, front and center went her prized SUV, polished like a mirror, backed right up to the hydrant. She even slapped a "reserved for host" sign on it with glitter tape. By 2 o'clock, our peaceful suburban street had transformed into some kind of carnival fever dream. There was a taco truck, a DJ spinning early 2000s club hits, and enough inflatable structures to qualify as a moon bounce compound. I spotted a toddler wandering around with a margarita straw in his mouth and no pants. 2 older men in polo shirts were already passed out under the snack table. Karen, in her poolside robe and oversized sun hat, was holding court near the deep end, sipping rose like she was on Real Housewives. And blasting through all of it, music, laughter, shouted toasts, was the increasingly smoky smell of something burning. At first, no one noticed. The breeze pushed the smoke in the opposite direction, and the only real concern people had was whether the taco truck had run out of carnitas. I, on the other hand, had a front row seat from my back deck and a nose that's way too sensitive to gas. I walked around the side of my house and immediately saw it, a thin pillar of smoke coming from the neighbor's yard across the street. Flames were licking up from behind their outdoor grill setup, and I could already hear the telltale pop of something under pressure. That wasn't just a barbecue accident, that was a full-on fire waiting to erupt. I ran inside, called 911, and tried to get someone's attention at the party. But the music was cranked so high that my voice was practically background noise. When I finally got Karen's attention, she rolled her eyes like I'd interrupted a wedding proposal. "Leo, don't be dramatic. It's probably just a citronella candle." "That's not a candle. That's a gas-fed fire, Karen. You need to move your car, now." She took a long sip from her glass, adjusted her sunglasses, and said, "Babe, my car's not going anywhere. The valet has the key. Besides, this is a no-fun zone emergency, not a real one." I could have screamed. The fire truck's sirens were already audible now, growing louder with each second. I knew the layout of the neighborhood better than anyone. I had actually worked on the emergency routing plan during my brief stint as a city engineer. That fire lane wasn't just decorative. It was the only viable path for emergency vehicles to reach the upper cul-de-sac. If they couldn't get through, there was a good chance the house on fire would be a total loss, or worse. And just like I predicted, the truck turned the corner at full speed and stopped. Well, almost. The driver slammed the brakes when he saw the barricade of SUVs, Karen's in particular, planted like a luxury roadblock across both lanes. One of the firefighters hopped down, marched over, and looked around for the owner. Karen was still lounging by the pool, annoyed that anyone was trying to disrupt her playlist. "This is a fire lane," the firefighter said loudly. "We need immediate access." Karen shouted back, "Tell your boys to go around. We're hosting a charity event." She then added, for neighborhood unity, even though the only charity involved was Karen's ego. The firefighter didn't respond. He turned, nodded to his partner, and within seconds the crew grabbed their tools. I started filming, not to be petty, but because I knew what was about to happen would become either a lawsuit or a legend. Karen suddenly realized what they were doing and sprinted, jog-limped, in her wedge heels across the lawn, flailing her arms like she was trying to flag down a jet. Wait. I found the valet key," she screamed, fumbling through her beach tote, knocking out tanning oil, sunglasses, and a bag of kale chips that had definitely never been opened. Too late. The first swing of the axe came down with surgical precision. The rear window exploded like it had been hit with a sledgehammer made of fury and protocol. A collective gasp swept across the party. Someone dropped a piña colada. Karen froze in place, hands still inside her tote, mouth open in a perfect O. The hose followed. They ran it straight through the broken window and out the front windshield. Another firefighter swung again, clearing a path with terrifying efficiency. The crowd of partygoers backed away like they were watching a demolition derby in slow motion. Karen, meanwhile, began to scream. Not words, just a kind of primal shriek usually reserved for horror films and lost designer handbag. The fire crew didn't flinch. They got the hose connected, ran it uphill, and within minutes had the flames under control. But the real fire, the one Karen had lit with her stubbornness, was just getting started. By the time the last embers of the backyard fire were hosed down, the crowd had gone from sunbathing and sipping cocktails to watching the chaos unfold like they were in the front row of a disaster movie. Karen stood motionless beside her wrecked SUV, mascara running, rose dripping off the hem of her robe, looking like a soggy villain from a soap opera. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so dangerous. The house across the street was badly scorched, but thanks to the detour through my yard, the firefighters had managed to save most of it. Still, the delay had cost them critical minutes that could have meant life or death under different circumstances. And all because Karen didn't want to walk an extra 30 feet from a legal parking spot. After the fire was put out, the fire captain walked over to Karen, whose yelling had slowed to occasional bursts of, "You'll be sorry," and "That's a custom interior." She clutched a mangled piece of what used to be her side mirror like it was a trophy from a war she'd lost. "You obstructed an emergency response," the captain said calmly but firmly. "You're going to be cited. And your vehicle was interfering with hydrant access. We had authorization to breach it." Karen scoffed. "I'm friends with the mayor. I'll have your badge by Monday." The firefighter didn't even blink. "Great. Tell him we say hi. And ask him if he remembers writing the fire code you just violated." She froze for a second, lips parted like she had a comeback queued up, but it never arrived. Instead, she just flung her ruined mirror onto the lawn and stomped off toward her house, muttering something about calling her lawyer and needing to dry her hair. As the crowd started to disperse, a few neighbors shot me sheepish glances. Some even murmured thanks under their breath. I didn't say much. I wasn't in this for the praise. I was just mad that someone's selfishness almost got people hurt. What really stuck with me, though, was how normal it had become for everyone to tiptoe around Karen's behavior like it was some kind of untouchable force of nature. She threw pool parties in drought season, hosted fireworks on her roof last July, and once installed solar panels across a community fence because the sun doesn't care about property lines. And every time someone tried to challenge her, she threatened them with bylaws and lawsuit. Until now, no one had pushed back with actual authority. Later that evening, I reviewed the footage from my Ring camera. I'd caught almost everything. The fire, the firefighters' arrival, Karen's screaming fit, and the axe turning her luxury SUV into a giant juice box. I debated whether to post it online. Not for revenge. Just so people could see how dangerous and entitled this kind of behavior really was. But before I could even decide, the video was already making the rounds. Turns out, someone else had recorded it too, from a balcony across the street, and uploaded it to a popular Reddit thread about entitled behavior. The title: Karen blocks fire lane for pool party. Fire crew axes her SUV like it's a watermelon. Within hours, it had 250,000 views and climbing. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab my mail and was immediately greeted by hushed whispers and pointed fingers. Apparently, word had spread quickly about who the guy who called 911 was. I didn't mind the attention, but I could feel something in the air, an uncomfortable mix of gratitude and awkwardness, like people didn't quite know whether to treat me as a hero or a snitch. That same morning, Karen tried to do damage control. She posted a long rant in the HOA Facebook group titled, "The Truth Behind Yesterday's Emergency." In it, she claimed the fire was exaggerated, that the firefighters were aggressive, and that her SUV was wrongfully destroyed without warning. She accused the department of overstepping and called the entire response a traumatizing overreaction to a glorified grill flare-up. Most of the group comments were surprisingly silent, except for one from Old Man Jenkins, who simply wrote, "Karen, they broke your window because you broke the law." That comment got 87 likes. Hers got 4. One of them was from her cousin. But Karen wasn't done. That afternoon, she marched down the street with a clipboard and started knocking on doors, gathering signatures for a formal complaint against misuse of emergency authority. She actually showed up at my doorstep, demanding I support her efforts as a fellow community member. When I asked her if she really thought her car was legally parked, she smiled and said, "The rules say no parking." I wasn't parked, I was hosting. I stared at her, blinking, unsure whether she was serious or just delusional. "I don't think that's how fire safety works," I said slowly. She narrowed her eyes. "You think you're some kind of hero because you tattled to the fire department?" "I think someone could have died," I said. She didn't respond. Just huffed, spun on her heel, and stomped off toward the next house on her list. Meanwhile, the fire marshal returned that evening to conduct a formal inspection. Not just of the burned property, but of Karen's party setup, too. Turns out she had about 6 different violations. No permits for the valet. No safety clearance for the bounce house. Open flames too close to the house. And, my personal favorite, illegally installed string lights on a tree that was technically city property. She tried to argue each point like she was on a courtroom drama, but the fire marshal just wrote citation after citation while she fumed in silence. And that was before the insurance adjuster showed up. Karen's SUV wasn't just damaged, it was totaled. Between the shattered windows, torn upholstery, soaked electronics, and a fire hose run through the middle, it was more aquatic exhibit than luxury vehicle now. She tried to claim it under her policy, but once the adjuster saw the viral footage and police report, he calmly informed her that her actions fell under negligence resulting in preventable damage, meaning she wasn't getting a dime. She screamed something unintelligible, slammed the door, and promptly posted another rant online, this time accusing the insurance company of gender-based sabotage. It got ratioed into oblivion. As night fell, the neighborhood returned to a quiet hum. You could still see the scorch marks on the side of the burned house, a reminder of how close things had come. But you could also feel something else, a subtle shift. Karen's spell was cracking. People were starting to realize that her reign of manipulation and noise wasn't invincible. She'd crossed a line, and this time, reality came swinging back with an axe. And somehow I had a feeling we were just getting started. 2 days after the fire lane fiasco, Karen Street looked like a crime scene for property damage and ego bruises. Her once pristine SUV now sat on her driveway like a crumpled exhibit in a cautionary tale museum. A plastic tarp flapped over the broken windows, duct-taped in panic, while her shattered side mirror had been replaced with a compact hand mirror zip-tied to the frame. She claimed it was temporary, but we all knew it was because the repair shop refused to touch the car until she paid in full, up front. Rumor had it they watched the viral video and didn't want to get involved in what one employee called the Karen situation. Of course, Karen couldn't just let it go. Her latest move? Attempting a full-blown legal counterattack. She stormed into the HOA office with a binder she claimed contained critical evidence, demanded an emergency board meeting, and insisted the HOA should pay for the damages since the event took place under neighborhood jurisdiction. Never mind the fact that she never filed a party permit or informed the HOA in the first place. When they denied her request, she threatened to sue the entire board. That's when 3 board members promptly resigned in the same meeting. She started calling news stations next. First the local ones, then the national ones, all in the hopes of spinning her story into one of victimhood. Single woman targeted by aggressive firemen. One of her emails read, completely omitting the part where she yelled at those same firemen and blocked life-saving access. None of the stations picked it up. In fact, one of them emailed back asking if they could use the viral video for a segment on public safety violations. She wasn't just losing the narrative, she was losing her grip. The kicker came when the fire department released a public statement. It was professional, measured, and devastatingly clear. It outlined the timeline of the fire, the delayed response due to the blocked lane, and the fact that the SUV was parked illegally in direct violation of city code. They even included photos, one of which was Karen standing beside the fire truck mid-shriek, holding her wine glass like a torch of entitlement. The photo became a meme within hours. I saw 3 different versions circulating on Reddit that week. One labeled her the Hydrant Herald. Another added text that said, "When you mix Pinot Grigio and poor life choices." My favorite simply read, "Fire lane? Never heard of her." Then came the insurance bombshell. Karen's claim had officially been denied. Not just for the damage to her car, but also for the event liability. The adjuster filed a separate report noting that her negligence had created risk exposure for multiple parties, including the burned neighbor's home, which might also seek damages. That's when it really hit her. This wasn't just about one ruined party or a trashed car. This could cost her tens of thousands in legal fees and payout. She was sitting on a powder keg of her own making, and the fuse had been lit by her own stubborn pride. But even that wasn't the worst of it. The very next day, the fire marshal returned, not just to follow up, but to deliver a subpoena. Karen was being summoned for a formal hearing related to obstruction of emergency services. If found liable, she could face community service, a fine, or, if the judge was in a particularly fed-up mood, actual jail time. When the marshal handed her the envelope, she tried to slam the door in his face. He calmly placed it between her iron flamingo lawn ornaments and walked away without a word. Meanwhile, I was trying to avoid the drama altogether, but that proved impossible. People started treating me like some kind of reluctant local celebrity. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months were stopping by to ask if I really filmed the whole thing. One woman even offered me baked goods as a thank you for calling 911. I wasn't used to that kind of attention. I was the guy who built spreadsheets for fun, who liked silence, who once attended a block party and left before the ice cream melted just to avoid conversation. But now everyone wanted to talk. Except Karen. She avoided me like I was radioactive. If she saw me in the grocery store, she'd turn and walk down another aisle. If we passed each other on the sidewalk, she'd pull out her phone and start pretending to talk to someone, loudly, about her upcoming legal victory. I didn't care about her silent treatment, I welcomed it. But I couldn't help noticing something strange. The more she tried to reassert control over her image, the more control she seemed to lose. Then, the final act of self-destruction began. Karen tried to throw another party. No joke. A Justice for Karen brunch on her front lawn, complete with protest signs that said, "Let Karen speak," and "Parking isn't a crime." She even printed flyers and left them in mailboxes. Only 3 people showed up, and one of them was her cousin who only came for the free bagels. Meanwhile, half the neighborhood was watching from porches, quietly sipping coffee like it was a live theater production. Someone across the street brought out a folding chair and popcorn. The fire marshal drove by slowly and waved. Karen didn't wave back. After that, the HOA had had enough. They scheduled an emergency vote. I didn't even know they could do that on such short notice, but apparently 3 board members had met with the city and gotten approval for a special session. The vote was to remove Karen as president of the HOA permanently and suspend her ability to hold events for the next year. The meeting was packed, standing room only, and for once nobody was afraid to speak. One by one, neighbors stood up and recounted stories. The unapproved pool parties, the petty fines, the security camera she once pointed into someone else's yard to monitor landscaping violations. It was like everyone had been holding their breath for years and finally let it out all at once. When the vote was called, the tally wasn't even close. She lost by a landslide. 1 person voted to keep her, and that was Karen herself. As she stood up to leave, humiliated and steaming, she made one last attempt to claw back some ground. She turned to the room and said, "You'll regret this. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without my leadership." From the back, Old Man Jenkins replied without missing a beat, "If falling apart means not getting fined for wind chimes, I'm all in." The room burst into laughter. Karen stormed out. Outside, the rain had started to fall lightly, one of those quiet, steady drizzles that made the whole neighborhood feel fresh. For the first time in a long while, things felt calm. No music shaking the walls. No glitter-covered SUVs parked in emergency zones. No HOA threats tucked under windshield wipers. Just the sound of water hitting leaves and the occasional relieved sigh from a neighbor who realized they wouldn't have to dodge another one of Karen's events anytime soon. And as I watched from my porch, still holding the leftover brownie someone had handed me after the meeting, I realized something simple but powerful. Justice hadn't arrived in a courtroom. It had come from a fire truck, an axe, and a whole community that finally said enough. The week following Karen's downfall was the quietest our neighborhood had felt in years. It was like the entire block had exhaled at once and decided to enjoy the silence while it lasted. No surprise inspections. No threat-filled newsletters about mailbox height regulations. No angry Facebook rants in all caps. Just birds, breeze, and the occasional rustling of someone doing actual yard work without worrying if they'd get a passive-aggressive fine for using the wrong brand of mulch. People were smiling more. Kids rode their bikes without dodging valet traffic cones. You could almost feel the stress melting off the sidewalk. Karen, however, wasn't done sulking. While she had officially been removed from her throne as HOA president, she still lived on the same street, and her pride was nursing a bruise that would not heal quietly. For the most part, she stayed indoors, peeking through her blinds and peering out from behind her giant ceramic garden gnome like she was in witness protection. But every now and then, she re-emerged with a new scheme that somehow made things worse. First came the attempt at a rebrand. She changed her Facebook group name from Karen's Corner to The Real Truth of Oak Ridge, and began posting multi-paragraph manifestos about neighborhood oppression and silenced leadership. Nobody interacted. It was like watching a bird scream into a canyon. She tried stirring up sympathy by posting old photos of her car before the fire truck incident, with captions like, "Gone but not forgotten," and "R.I.P. Luxury." One post even had a quote about loss written in Comic Sans. You could practically hear the internet groan. Meanwhile, the city wasn't finished with her. A fire marshal showed up again, this time with 2 colleagues and a clipboard full of follow-up. Turns out the citations weren't just fines, they triggered a formal review. They inspected her electrical setup, the backyard pool gate, even the fire extinguishers she claimed she had on standby. According to one of the inspectors, the extinguisher they found under her patio table had expired in 2014 and had a daisy sticker on it. She tried to argue, of course, waving her arms and claiming she'd been targeted, but the fire marshal calmly reminded her that she had obstructed an active fire response. Her reputation wasn't under attack, it was simply catching up to her. As word spread, more neighbors began speaking up. A group of residents came forward with stories they'd never felt safe sharing before. There was the couple she once threatened to report for hanging wind chimes, claiming they attracted birds that pooped on her deck. A teacher on the street said Karen had once emailed her principal to complain about her front lawn, implying it reflected poorly on the school district. Even the mail carrier chimed in. Apparently, Karen had filed a formal USPS complaint because her mail was delivered with insufficient care. Then came the surprise visitor. A city representative from the Department of Code Enforcement showed up one sunny afternoon with a digital tablet and an apologetic tone. She explained that, due to the widespread attention the viral video had brought to our neighborhood, they were required to do a full compliance audit, not just for Karen but for several properties on the block. It was standard procedure, but the kicker was that Karen's home was flagged for the highest number of potential violations. The findings were brutal. Unpermitted deck extension. Fence too tall. Illegal LED signs still left over from her "Party Like a Patriot" 4th of July rager. And, most damning, the security cameras she'd installed on public trees without permission. The city issued her a deadline to correct the issues or face daily penalties. Karen tried, once again, to flip the script, claiming she had been framed, that her enemies were feeding the city lies. But no one was buying it anymore, not even her former loyalists. The HOA board, now under new leadership, decided to go on offense. They held a community meeting, not to discuss rules or fines, but to listen. It was the first time in years that people felt like their voices mattered. I attended, mostly out of curiosity, and ended up staying the entire time. Neighbors brought up ideas for neighborhood gardens, group events, and even creating a shared tool library. It was like someone had lifted a fog. Without Karen's iron grip, people were finally collaborating again. During that meeting, someone brought up the idea of inviting the fire department back, not for an emergency, but for a thank you cookout. The idea caught fire immediately. Everyone pitched in. We planned a simple, relaxed barbecue in the park at the end of the street, where the kids could meet the fire crew, and we could all show appreciation. I was asked to help coordinate, mostly because people saw me as the guy who started the chain of events that saved the neighborhood. I didn't argue. I just said sure, as long as nobody gave me a megaphone or made me do a speech. Karen, upon hearing about the event, tried to have it moved. She emailed the HOA claiming it was, in poor taste, to celebrate a fire crew that destroyed community property. She also claimed the timing was inconsiderate, as it interfered with her planned silent candle vigil for municipal overreach. No one acknowledged her protest. She showed up anyway, standing on the sidewalk in a black shawl, holding a single candle during broad daylight, while kids laughed and sprayed each other with squirt guns 20 feet away. The fire crew arrived right on time. They parked the engine legally, greeted every family with handshakes and smiles, and even let some of the kids climb up into the truck. The same truck, I might add, that had taken out Karen's SUV windows with surgical precision. One of the firefighters recognized me and laughed, patting the side of the truck like it was an old friend. "This baby made history on your street," he said. "People still talk about it back at the station." I wasn't the only one who remembered. Someone brought cookies shaped like fire hydrants. Another neighbor handed out keychains that said "Respect the lane." And when it came time to take a group photo with the fire crew, nearly everyone on the block showed up. Everyone, except Karen, who by then had disappeared back inside her house, slamming the door hard enough to shake her garden gnome. By the end of the night, something had shifted. Not just the leadership, not just the rules, but the tone. People were done living under fear of fines and petty tyranny. The fire lane incident, as ridiculous and over-the-top as it had been, had become the turning point. The absurdity of watching a fire truck axe through a luxury SUV over a party was what it took to make people realize that Karen's reign wasn't inevitable, it was just tolerated. Now, it wasn't anymore. It started as a joke, honestly. Someone made a meme after the fire crew barbecue, a photoshopped image of Karen's SUV mid-destruction, with dramatic flames in the background and a firefighter holding a glowing battle axe like he was in a video game. The caption read, "Fire Lane Final Boss, Defeated." It was passed around in group chats, laughed about over morning coffee, and eventually printed and taped to the HOA office bulletin board. Nobody claimed credit for putting it there, but nobody took it down either. That was the energy now. Karen had gone from feared HOA overlord to the cautionary tale of the decade, and while no one was outright cruel about it, the humor helped people heal from the years of tension she had inflicted. In the weeks that followed, things continued to shift. Where there used to be threats and fines, there were now block parties and garden swaps. Where there had been cold silences and sideways glares, now there were greetings and shared lawn tools. For the first time in as long as any of us could remember, the neighborhood felt like a community. Even the people who had quietly supported Karen before started coming around, admitting they'd just been afraid of becoming her next target. Without her relentless surveillance and the threat of HOA write-ups, people started getting to know each other again. And that was probably the sweetest revenge of all, watching the block come alive in the exact way Karen had always pretended she was fostering, only now without her in control. But the story didn't end with silence. Karen wasn't built for quiet disgrace. About a month after the infamous Axe-to-SUV incident, a moving truck showed up in her driveway. The word spread like wildfire, with neighbors casually strolling by under the guise of dog walking or checking their mail, just to catch a glimpse. Karen didn't make any announcements, but she didn't have to. The tension around her house had been building for weeks, and it was clear she was either selling or being forced to leave. There were rumors about mounting fines, failed insurance appeals, and a potential civil suit from the neighbors whose home had caught fire. The details didn't matter as much as the symbolism. The woman who once claimed she was the foundation of Oak Ridge was being boxed up and carted out like an old set of mismatched patio furniture. On her last day, she stood outside for a long time, staring at the front of her house. She looked smaller, somehow, wrapped in a hoodie and oversized sunglasses like a celebrity caught in scandal. A few people watched from afar, waiting to see if she'd cause a final scene or deliver a dramatic farewell. But there was no yelling this time, no threats or declarations. Just silence. Then she climbed into the passenger seat of her cousin's truck and disappeared down the street, leaving behind a cracked driveway, a few broken garden gnomes, and a legacy built entirely on pettiness and pool parties. No one clapped. No one celebrated publicly. But that evening, a spontaneous gathering happened near the park. Neighbors brought food, drinks, lawn chairs. Someone played music through a Bluetooth speaker, and someone else grilled hot dogs. A little boy ran up to me and shouted, "Hey! You're the fire guy." I laughed and corrected him, saying I wasn't a firefighter, just the guy who made a phone call and had a Ring camera. He didn't care. To him, I was part of the reason his mom let him stay up past bedtime now and go to fun neighborhood cookouts. The next day, a sign appeared in the HOA garden space. It was a simple wooden board, hand-painted with the words, "Community over control." Someone had planted fresh flowers underneath it. Another person added a small bench nearby. Over the course of a week, more small touches appeared. Solar lights, painted rocks, even a little library box where people could take or leave a book. It became a symbol, not just of what we had survived, but what we were building in its place. And then came the final twist, the one that sealed Karen's place in local legend forever. About 2 weeks after she moved out, a billboard went up on the highway exit just a few miles from our neighborhood. It wasn't flashy, just a plain background with a still frame from the viral video, Karen mid-scream, SUV window shattering, hose threading through her luxury interior. The text beneath it read, "Respect fire lanes. Save lives." There was a small fire department logo in the corner. It wasn't a joke. It was a real PSA, commissioned by the city after seeing the clip's insane viral reach. When local news covered the billboard, they didn't use Karen's full name, but anyone who lived nearby knew exactly who it was. Karen had wanted to be famous. In the end, she got exactly what she asked for, just not in the way she imagined. Some neighbors made a trip just to take a selfie with the billboard. Someone put a "Karen-free zone" bumper sticker on their car. I overheard teenagers joking that our street had gone from HLA hell to suburb heaven. But for me, the true win wasn't the memes or the internet fame or the petty catharsis. It was the small, quiet things. The family that brought their chairs outside again. The older couple that now chatted with people instead of hiding behind hedges. The shared laughter without the tension underneath it. Eventually, life went back to normal. The burned home was repaired, the fire hydrant was freshly painted, and Karen's house was sold to a young couple with a baby and a Labrador. They hosted a modest barbecue the week they moved in. No valet. No DJ. Just burgers, lemonade, and a few folding chairs. I introduced myself and welcomed them to the neighborhood. They'd heard about the story, of course they had, and they laughed nervously, asking if the Karen stories were real. I told them the basics, left out the billboard, and said the important part was that the neighborhood had changed, for the better. As I stood on my porch that night, watching the lights twinkle across calm, happy houses, I thought back to the moment when everything had snapped into place. The sirens, the axe, the fire, the scream. It had felt chaotic at the time, absurd even, but looking back, it had been necessary. Like a thunderstorm breaking a long drought. Karen's reign had ended not with a vote or a petition, but with a fire truck doing what no one else had dared to do, cut straight through the nonsense and demand space for what really mattered. And in the end, that space made room for something better. Not just peace and quiet, but connection. A neighborhood that finally remembered what it meant to be neighbors. All it took was one badly parked SUV, a hose, an axe, and a moment of long overdue justice served poolside.